Catherine's grandmother owned a string of jade rosary beads that shone brilliantly in her palms. The shine seemed to penetrate directly into the depths of her soul. These jade beads could probably be sold for a hefty price, Catherine pondered. After all, her grandmother was approaching 80. Did she still need such opulent jade beads? And her grandma's sight was failing. Surely she couldn't distinguish between jade and glass. So, Catherine decided to replace her grandma's jade beads with a string of glass ones. However, the moment her grandmother touched the glass beads, she gave a sudden quiver, and then she passed away. In the wake of her grandmother's demise, Catherine heard the bead story for the first time from her father's lips. Apparently, when Catherine was born, she nearly perished in the nursery. Her grandmother went to great lengths and purchased a string of jade Buddha beads, reciting prayers for her day and night. Like a small miracle, she survived. Her grandma used to turn the beads every day after that, claiming that every 180,000 turns, she could extend Catherine's life by a day. On hearing this, Catherine was paralyzed with guilt and tears streamed down her face. The next morning, she secretly returned the jade beads to her grandmother, who now lay in a coffin. She was astounded to see that her grandmother's emaciated hand, almost miraculously, started to move again. The beads began to turn rapidly in a majestic, almost magical dance. Except this time, her grandmother was rotating the beads anti-clockwise. On a cold night, Sarah's piercing scream broke the quiet of the late night. She awoke from her nightmare, her body drenched in cold sweat. Her husband, Joseph, hugged her into his chest, soothing her fears with a gentle whisper. Through tears, Sarah confessed her dream of her coworker Tom pushing her off a New York skyscraper. Joseph assured her, dreams once spoken remain just that, dreams. Gently patting her back, he promised her that none of this would ever come to pass. Eventually, Sarah drifted back to sleep in his arms. The following morning, as Sarah walked into her office, Tom was nowhere to be found, and from that day on, he vanished without a trace. Days later, Sarah had another nightmare. This time, she was violated by her boss, a greasy middle-aged man. In the midst of the midnight terror, Joseph was her sanctuary once again. Darling, remember, dreams once spoken aloud can never become reality. Just as Joseph had said, the greasy man disappeared as if he had never existed. Sarah was always having nightmares, always threatened by different people. But no matter what, Joseph was always there, comforting her, making those who threatened her disappear from her life. However, on a freezing cold night, Sarah's scream shattered the serenity. Joseph held her fearfully in his arms, attempting to ask about the horrors in her dream, but she looked at him, too terrified to speak a word. Joseph suddenly understood. He gently got out of bed, making sure she was settled. Then he silently walked to the basement of their mansion. There were many people lying still, including Tom, the greasy boss. He gently made a cut on his own neck, laying down beside them. She often wondered why he loved her. Samantha was not what one would call a classic beauty. Her figure was somewhat round, her moves a bit clumsy, and she couldn't even cook a decent meal. Jack, on the other hand, was the epitome of masculine charm, handsome, artistic, a fine conversationalist, and a master chef. Every time she asked him why he chose her, he would gently lift her chin and gaze deeply into her eyes with his own stunning pair that mimicked the stars in the night sky. "I love your heart, Sam. It's as clear as crystal," he would say. She would girlishly blush each time. Lately, he had been acting strangely. He would come home late claiming he was working overtime, but his clothes would smell of alcohol, and she even found strands of long hair on his jacket that didn't belong to her. Driven by suspicion, she trailed him one evening and discovered him in bed with an extraordinarily beautiful woman. Caught red-handed, Jack was not flustered. He still held Sam's chin and told her, "Believe me, Sam, I prefer your clear heart over her beauty." His eyes were the same beautiful stars, but she didn't believe a single word. At that moment, all she wanted was to leave him. Reading the determination in her eyes, he looked unusually stern. "I'll prove it to you, Sam. I love your heart." Suddenly, he lunged at the other woman, plunging his hand into her chest, pulling out her heart and crushing it in front of Sam. Petrified, Samantha watched as her lover demonstrated his love in the most extreme way possible. He pulled her into an embrace, slipping his hand into her chest from behind. He carefully took her heart and placed it in the woman's body, whispering almost guiltily, "And I also like her looks, Sam." This ruby red, digital photo frame was a prize that Sarah had recently won at a mall raffle. She sat down to playfully upload photo after photo, taking pleasure in the old memories, until a warning popped up, indicating the storage was full. Shrugging, she nonchalantly deleted a high-definition portrait of her friend, Lisa. The very next day, she received news that Lisa had died. Her heart inexplicably pounded in her chest. A wave of dread washed over her. Once home, she, almost thoughtlessly, deleted the photograph of her stressful colleague, George. Soon she found out that George had been killed in a car accident. Fear mixed with a strange sense of power coursed through her as she began to understand the eerie farce playing out. Panic-stricken, she couldn't prevent herself from calling her good friend, Annie. The very moment she hung up, she regretted it. If word of her terrible secret got out, she would be ruined. "I'm so sorry, Annie," she whispered, ready to delete her friend's picture. Just then, she heard a click, just like the sound made by the frame when a photo was deleted. And then she was no more. In another part of the city, her friend Annie was idly messing with a similar red frame, whispering, "I'm really sorry, Sarah. Some things are just not meant to be shared, even between best friends."